My name is Andrea, and I hope that I have my camera balanced carefully because I want to tell you the story of Saul. There is a Saul in the New Testament, and his name was changed to Paul. But this is the Saul in the Old Testament who was the very first king of the Israelites. Now, you probably remember Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the one who we call a patriarch. Our patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons. So whenever you hear about the 12 tribes of Israel, those are the people who are related to his 12 sons. Now, from the tribe of Benjamin, and Benjamin was the 12th son of Jacob, there was a man named Saul. And the Bible says he was tall and he was handsome. In fact, the Bible goes on to say that there was no one more handsome than Saul, anywhere you could look. So that's how handsome he was, but we don't have a picture of him. And what had happened to Saul is that his donkeys had wandered away. Now, that was bad news for Saul, but we never know how God can use bad news and turn it into good news, because he didn't know that he was going to be anointed the very first king of Israel. So he went into the land of Zuph. I've never been to the land of Zuph, and I'm not quite sure where I would find it now. But he went into the land of Zuph, hoping to find his donkeys. And he heard that there was a prophet named Samuel nearby, and that Samuel might know where his donkeys were. Well, it was a good try. So he and his servant went off looking for the donkeys. Now, they happened to pass Samuel face forward. So if Samuel was facing them, they were facing Samuel, passing each other. And Samuel got a word from God, and God said, "This is the one. You're going to anoint him." All right, so Samuel said, "I'll tell you what, why don't you eat dinner with us and don't worry about the donkeys. I'm going on into a town nearby, and I'm going to make a sacrifice. I'm going to bless the sacrifice for the people. And why don't you just come and eat with us?" So Saul decided to do that, and he was given a very special portion of sheep's meat, which included the tail. So that was extremely important to him. Now, he was anointed by Samuel after the feast. And Samuel said, "Don't worry about your donkeys. Your donkeys have been found, and you are going to be the first king of Israel." Well, that was good news in two ways. He was going to be the first king of Israel, and his donkeys had been found. So when he went back home, he said nothing to his father about being anointed king of Israel. He was keeping that kind of not sure what to do with that news. But he did say that the donkeys had been found. Now, when Samuel came to anoint him in front of all the people and present him as the very first king, well, Saul didn't quite know what to do, so he hid behind the baggage, and they had to find him there. Now, he did start to act like a king after a while. He liked being a king. He was a good warrior. He was tall. He was well thought of. And the main enemies that the Israelites had back in those days were called Philistines. They were their main enemies. Now, another warrior that we will find out more about was Jonathan. Jonathan was the son of Saul. He was a handsome young man and very, very kind-hearted. And Saul, of course, wanted him to be the king. Now, Saul had some mental health problems, which we will find out more about as we learn more about Saul. And one day he made a prediction, or actually a curse, that he wasn't going to stop until he found this certain enemy, and no one was going to eat anything until he found this certain enemy, and that if anybody ate anything, then that person would be put to death. Well, that's pretty extreme. Jonathan, his son, didn't know that he was making that curse, and so he and his servant found some wild honey, and they ate it. Then later on, Saul said, "Whoever ate anything should be put to death." And so all the people said, "No, we're really not going to help you put Jonathan to death." That didn't make sense. So there were some of the things that Saul did that really did not make sense. The kingdom was eventually taken away from Saul by God because of some things that Saul had done that were against God's commandments, which are just too complicated to go into right now. But you can read all about Saul's adventures in the first and second book of Samuel. So the kingdom had actually been taken away from Saul, but Saul didn't want to admit it, and he didn't like to think about it. So he just kept fighting the Philistines and doing the best he could to try to be a good king. So now we've heard most of what we're going to hear about Saul and his son Jonathan, but we will get back to them later as the adventure continues. Now Samuel was told by God, go and anoint the next king. Again, where am I supposed to find the next king? Well, God was all ready to help with that. And he said, you need to go to a man named Jesse. Jesse is the son of Obed. And remember, Obed, well, you may not remember this, but I'm telling you now. Obed was the husband of Ruth, and Ruth has a Bible book named after her. Ruth was not even Jewish. She was a Moabitess, but she loved the Jewish people, and she loved her mother-in-law, and she wanted to be with the Jewish people. So Ruth is very important to us, and she is the grandmother of King David. Ruth and Obed were married. They had a little son named Jesse, and Jesse became the father of David. Now, Jesse was extremely lucky in his life because he not only had 7 sons, he had 8 sons. So that is quite a blessing. And his sons were ruddy and handsome. They call it ruddy and handsome, which means that they spent a lot of time outdoors. They were good athletes, and they were very good looking. So when Samuel came to the house of Jesse, he said, well, when he saw the first son, he said, this must be the one. And the Lord said, nope, that's not the one. And one by one down the first 7 sons of Jesse, he said, isn't this the one? Nope, that's not the one. And the Bible said number 3, number 4, number 5, all the way to number 7, until we finally found out that none of those were the ones. Well, he's in a pickle now because he didn't know what to do next. So he turned around to Jesse and he said, don't you have any more sons? How is this all going to work out? And Jesse said, I just have one more son, but he's just a kid, and he's out tending the sheep. Samuel was told by God that he was going to anoint someone that belonged to Jesse, and Jesse should go and get that son right now, and no one was going to eat a bite until he got there. So in comes David, and he again was ruddy and handsome and very young. And he was a very good shepherd. A good shepherd takes good care of his sheep, and he knows how to spend his time wisely, like making up songs or making up psalms, like David did. He was very good at fighting bears and wolves and lions and any animal that would try to attack his sheep. So David was anointed. He didn't quite know what that meant or how that would all work out. Later on, there were more wars against the Philistines. As we've said, Saul's life was mostly devoted to having wars with Philistines. And they were from a country called Philistia, but mainly they lived side by side with the Jewish people. So a big man named Goliath came along, and he challenged all of the Hebrew soldiers. He said, who wants to come out and fight me? One-on-one. Come out and fight me, and I will kill him and throw his carcass to the dogs. So that was not a very nice way to talk, but that's the way he was talking because he wanted to fight with one of the Hebrews. So none of the Hebrews really wanted to fight him because he was so tall. And apparently he had 6 fingers on each hand, which was sort of a big deal, and it made them think that he might be even more strong than anybody else because of the 6 fingers that he had on each hand. I don't know exactly why someone would have 6 fingers, but that happens sometimes. So David said, no, I want to fight Goliath. Oh, his brothers were so disgusted with him. They said, why don't you just go back home and tend to the sheep? We're soldiers, we'll fight. Because they were the 7 sons of Jesse, and they weren't too happy about their little brother coming and trying to help with the war. Well, Saul heard there's a young man out here that says he wants to fight against Goliath. Nobody else wants to do it, So why don't we let him give it a try? So Saul said, "Come on in here. Let's talk to this young man. What's your name?" "My name is David." "Well, who is your father?" "My father is Jesse." "Jesse, the one that has the 7 sons who are already in my army, and you want to join too? Well, these are very brave young men. You must be brave also. I will give you my armor to put on." So Saul gave him his helmet and his armor that he put over his shoulders and what he buckled to his knees and all the different kinds of armor. Well, David wasn't used to this kind of thing. He was also very small. And by the time he got all that armor on, he couldn't even walk. He said, "No, no, no. I'm not going to be able to fight Goliath this way. What I'm going to do instead is that I'm going to fight Goliath the same way I fight the lions and the wolves that try to hurt my sheep." He had a little slingshot, and he put a stone in the slingshot and he swung it around and around and around. Well, when Goliath saw David, he just started laughing. He said, "This is ridiculous. Am I a dog that you've sent a flea out to fight with me?" So, not too impressed. But David took this slingshot, went around and around and around and around, and finally let it go and hit him right in the head, and he died. And that is the story of David and Goliath. Now, whenever you hear that there's a David and Goliath story, that means you've got someone, you may even hear this in sports sometimes. That means that you have got someone who is very small and not expected to win, and he is fighting against someone who is very large and is very strong and is expected to win. So that's a David and Goliath story. Now, David became very famous after this. He was still a shepherd. He was not the king yet. He was still a shepherd, but he was told by God that someday he would be king. Didn't quite know how to handle all that, but he became a warrior and a soldier, and he fought with Saul. Saul got to be a little bit worried about David because there was a song going around. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. So the girls out in the street were singing that David was a better soldier than Saul, and he didn't care for that very much. And remember, Saul had some mental health problems and he started kicking in. Well, I hear my timer going off. We're going to hear more about Saul and Jonathan and David the next time we get together. Thank you very much for joining me.